also a Shakespearean actor on screen. He was the second grave digger in Hamlet, directed by Kenneth Branagh in 1996. He was Falstaff in the first and second parts of Henry IV for the BBC TV series The Whole Crown, and he was himself in the TV show Can't on Shakespeare in 2016, in which Philomena Conk asks him whether he just learns by heart the famous cues by Shakespeare, such as to be or not to be, or whether he also learns the bits and pieces in between. So Simon was granted many awards, among which the BAFTA Award for Best Television Actor in 1998, and for Best Supporting Actor in The Hollow Crown for the role of Falstaff in 2013. He was awarded the Laurence Olivier Award for Best Actor in 2000 and 2003. And for his multiple services to drama, he was awarded the Honorary Freedom of the City of London in 2011 and was knighted by Queen Elizabeth in October 2019. So Simon was also made an Honorary Fellow of the Shakespeare Institute in Birmingham in 2018, which is one of his numerous connections with Michael Dobson. He also contributed to Michael's book on performing Shakespeare's tragedy today, The Actor's Perspective, which was published at Cambridge in 2006. So we're now going to leave the first part of this conversation with Sir Simon, after which you will be given an opportunity, of course, to ask questions directly to Simon. So I hand it over to Michael for the first question.
Thank you. So, Simon, I gather you've done a bit of Shakespeare there. Clearly, you've had the good fortune to spend quite a lot of your career doing Shakespeare, but I should perhaps put a question that's been discussed from different perspectives over the last couple of days here. Do you think of yourself as a Shakespearean actor, and is there still such a thing, if there ever was?
That reminds me of... I can't remember what year it was, but they used to, and I don't know whether they still do it, but in London they used to give a Shakespeare medal, the Critics' Circle. No, it was a Shakespeare medal?
Yeah.
The J.C. Truin Medal for Best Shakespearean Actor of the Year. And I remember one year Sam West, who I know has already been mentioned at this conference, was awarded it. He said, there's no difference. I don't know why I'm getting an award specifically for Shakespearean acting. And I sort of half agree. I know that when I did a musical called Spamalot, and I played King Arthur, and it was based on Monty Python, Holy Grail film, and I was being interviewed about it, and they said, how do you approach it? And I said, well, actually, to be honest, in exactly the same way as I approach Hamlet. You have to ask the same questions, whether you're playing King Arthur in a musical, whether you're playing Hamlet. You know, I have to work out the relationship with my horse. In that case, that was very, very important, and I had to work out what I meant by trotting around pretending I had a horse and what that did to your brain. So actually, I think the questions probably are the same for whatever you play, but there is inescapably a set of techniques, most of which I break and ignore and have abused over my career. But there are a set of techniques, aren't there? And I think you have to acknowledge that they exist, and you have to acknowledge that you either do them, play by the rules, or break the rules, but you know what you're doing with the rules. And I think that probably is true of great literary drama. You know, you have to acknowledge it.
Yeah, I mean, on the whole, in a Shakespeare play, especially if you're playing a leading role in a tragedy, you get to do more talking over the course of the evening than in most other kinds of play. But I say that with some hesitation, having recently seen you in the Lehman trilogy, to which you'll return, in which you do really quite a lot of talking, since there's only three of you in the cast. Do you feel there are certain resources of an actor that are called on more in Shakespeare than in other writers?
Over dinner last night, actually, we were talking about film acting, weren't we, fleetingly? And I've always found film acting a puzzle because I haven't done a lot of it, and I don't regard myself as skilled in that area, and I do think there is a different set of techniques which are not to do with words. And I've been trained I was trained very early on in my life, as I was mentioned earlier, playing Hippolyta when I was 10 or whatever. I was trained very early on to deal with words using words as the weapons that I use on stage. And when you do film, that is not necessarily the case. I still regard myself as a word actor. That's the weapons I have.
Yeah. But you're also a musical actor, and again, as we were talking about last night, you're also a retired ballet dancer. Or, I mean, perhaps not retired.
No,
I don't know, you might not
indeed.
get back to it yet. Tell me about the physical aspects of your work and whether any of that ballet experience still participates in it.
Well, having said, as I said, words are the weapons I've been privileged to be able to use. Of course, actually, if the truth be known, I remember I think I was working with a designer on Richard III, Sam's production of Richard III, which is very early on in my career. And of course, the thing about Richard III is it's quite important to work out what you look like, isn't it? And Tony Sher, Sir Anthony Sher, had just done a very famous performance of Richard III a few years previously, and was compared to a spider. And I remember sitting in front of the mirror thinking, he was in my mind actually, I wasn't comparing myself to him particularly, but he was in my mind. I thought, I've got to have something that appeals to me as a shape before I can go any further. And in the end I developed a shape which was like, I said I want to look like a retired American football player. I want to be absolutely huge and sort of muscles going weak and flabby. And that was a great spur to the actual performance. And I suddenly realised, actually, I'm fooling myself here. A lot of my inspiration comes from visual stimuli as well, actually.
Yeah, because I've been lucky to see you right through your career. I mean, we were saying last night, some of us are lucky enough to remember you in the Middleton play you were in before the RSC picked you up, when you were playing the ward in Women Beware Women with Gary Oldman as Sordido, which was an incredibly physical performance of sort of shame and self-loathing, and it was an amazing piece. There are many actors I've seen and I thought, that one's not going anywhere, and they've turned out to be major actors in due course. But I got it right with you. I think I'll follow this one. And from the Richard III, I remember you seemed to have a way of suggesting that Richard's body was becoming progressively more dense over the course of the play, as though eventually he became so heavy he could barely carry himself. It was an incredible effect. You worked with Sam Mendes a number of times over your career. Has the relation does it make a difference working with a director you've worked with before? Have directors changed over the course of your working life?
Yes, I've had a few very close relationships with Nick Heitner, who ran the National Theatre for 10 years, and I was with him almost all that time, and predominantly Sam. And Sam and I met for this production of Troilus and Cressida, which again, a bit like Women Beware Women, you look back and you think, the cast list of that, I mean, it was sort of astonishing. Ray Fiennes was playing Troilus, and blah, blah, blah. It went on and on, this sort of list of very great actors. But Sam, who was at that point in his 20s and a sort of young, new kid on the block, phoned me up and said, would I pay for cites? And in fact, I first of all thought, this is so, I don't want to do another Shakespeare clown. I've never regarded myself as being particularly skilled at doing Shakespeare clowns. And I almost turned it down, but then I thought, careeristically, hang on a minute, he's a bit hot at the moment. I think I'd better try my chance my arm with him. And of course, it transpired to be a brilliant production by Sam, incredible restraint and elegance. For a young director to do that with a complicated play like Troilus was extraordinary. And of course, Thersites as a character is not like any other clown. He's actually scabrous and very funny, which is such a relief. His words are actually funny. So that was the beginning of a long relationship, and it has been fascinating watching him change. In fact, in the last year, I think I've witnessed a very big change in Sam's work. I think the downside of knowing someone very, very well is that we get comfortable in our own relationship. And I think that's an irritation to other people in the room. But I also think it can mean that we get locked into a particular methodology. And Sam's method in the rehearsal room is has got simpler and simpler, actually. He knows that if he starts with an empty box and basically an empty set, because that has to be designed early, then he can build through that with his actors and add stuff and then strip away or whatever. But he does it from an empty box to start off with, and he's become very adept at that. The downside of that is that, as I say, you can become easy on yourself. And as it happens, over the last year, he and I and two other brilliant actors, Adam Godley and Ben Miles, have been working on this thing called the Lehman Trilogy, which is, as you say, extremely wordy, long 3-hour play where 3 actors simply do not stop talking. And it's like a play, it's like a beast that none of us have ever done before. And I remember before we started, I said to Sam, and he agreed, that I said, this is going to really push us, because we've no idea how to do this. It's not really a play, it's a long poem divided between 3 voices. It doesn't make any theatrical sense. And he was brilliant. I mean, he really dug deep, and he and by his own admission, was finding a new vocabulary. At the same time, or just subsequently, of course, he's just about to open, I see the posters up in Paris, or around Paris, 1917, his new film, which I would urge you to go and see, because I saw it a couple of days ago, and it opens on Friday in the UK, yesterday, yeah, and here in Paris about now. It is technically the most astonishing piece of work, absolutely astonishing, and I think he's finding a different vocabulary, and I'll be interested to see if he ever asks me to do another play or a film, which I've never done with him, that he would be interested to see how he's changed. But he is, I think, gone through an early middle-aged moment, and rather successfully.
Florence.
I have a question which is somewhat connected to this. There are plays you have performed several times in different roles. I'm just going to give 4 examples. The Tempest, you played Ariel in Sam Mendes' production in 1994, and then you played Prospero, directed by Gregory Duran.
Yep.
In Volpone, you started playing Sir Puddick Whitby in 1986, and then Mosca in 1995. Or Hamlet, since you started with a second grade figure in the film, directed by Kenneth Branagh in 1996, and then the title role on stage 4 years later. The Winter's Day, where you play a young shepherd, and then the Youngtons in 2009. So, what kind of experience is it to revisit the same play years later, from a different point of view, sometimes first embodying a second character, before playing a more central character, or even the title role?
I'm going to take my time over this answer, because I actually hadn't linked those 2 of those with being a double. I mean, I wouldn't count Politic Woodby. My performance as Politic Woodby doesn't count. Just doesn't count. So we ignore that one. The Tempest is interesting. Sam, it was our 3rd show together, he phoned me up and he said, I hope David Chant, who played for Caliban, doesn't mind me telling this, but he said, would you like to do Caliban? And I'm doing Tempest with Alec McCann, the great Alec McCann. And I remember I was on the phone, and by that stage I knew Sam well and loved working with him and loved him. And I wasn't, nothing happened. But yeah, great, lovely Caliban. And not one nice big speech, that's nice. And I said, it'll be like Richard, I just done Richard III. And I said, it'll be like Richard III with no clothes on, you do. And then about 2 weeks later, he came back to me and said, actually, I've been thinking, because you trained as a singer, which is when I started off at the Guildhall as an opera singer, would you like to do Ariel? At which point my stomach turned, because I thought that is just so unlikely. I mean, I've never changed much in my shape, and I said that sounds absolutely fascinating. As long as you promise I won't fly, because I think that would be ludicrous, I would be thrilled. And it turned out, as Michael saw it, you saw it, didn't you? It turned out to be rather extraordinary, because we had to devise a way of somebody my shape and my weight, I don't mean literal weight, but weight, plays a creature of air. And we devised, and I won't bore you now, but I'll tell you later if you like, but we devised, through a sort of series of lucky accidents, or I hope they were lucky anyway, through a series of accidents, of moving very, very slowly and very balletically. That had the effect of making Ariel incredibly imperious. I mean, he was ice cold, which then led to the idea, which caused a bit of consternation in some circles, of Ariel spitting in Prospero's face when Prospero released him. At the end, that lovely, great moment. To the elements be free, and fare thee well, fare thee well. And yeah, spat in his face. Not my idea. I can't take credit for that. That was Sam's idea. Anyway, so that type of Ariel, that type of relationship with Prospero, when I played him 25 years later, I couldn't envisage the idea of Ariel ever spitting in my face. I thought it was an appalling idea, since I was obviously such a essentially good man, if a little bit grumpy. No, I found the whole relationship to the play had changed, because it became a marvellous expression of, well, ageing, really, or middle age, or disappointment, or bitterness, or whatever, but it became obviously seen through Prospero's eyes and not through Ariel's eyes, so the whole play switched round. So from becoming a rather cold and unpleasant play about oppression, it turned into a man coping with disappointment and the need to forgive and all those things that we know the play was also about. The same sort of thing happened with Winter's Tale. You just see it. It's an obvious thing to say. You see it from a different perspective. If you play the young shepherd, which was one of my first professional Shakespeare role, with Terry in Winter's Tale, your perspective, if you see the play through that long pastoral sheep shearing scene, is different if you're playing Leontes suffering, years of self-torture and whatever. So I think these things change. Hamlet, the other thing to say, just in conclusion to the answer, is that I never expected to play Hamlet. So I never expected to, although I knew I didn't want to be a clown, because I don't think I've got those skills, and I think there are certain skills that Shakespeare clowns need. I can't specify them, but there's a certain physical presence or a certain stage craft or something that they need to make those roles live. So I knew I wasn't a clown, but I was being looked at as a comic actor, and I assumed, despite my overweening ambition, that I would never play Hamlet. So that series of, when you go through a play and you suddenly realise you are now Leontes, or you're now Hamlet rather than the second gravedigger and the young shepherd, it is a big change in your own head. And I think I was also lucky. I've been acting for 30 years, and I think over 30 years, whatever period, lots of things change. And one of the things that's changed in my lifetime has been the way we look at the physical makeup of our performers. Certainly for women, that's a big question. But for men too. I mean, I don't think anybody thought a short, chubby man was going to play Hamlet. And I think it was a big moment when, I think it was Terry Howard who had cast me as Constantine in The Seagull, and that was a big moment for me when he said, actually, no, I think there's something about you that is not just short and tubby and funny. And I think that is not to do with me. I think that's to do with the way theatre has changed.
Yeah, thanks. There was a big Peter Brook event in London a few weeks ago. It was the 50th anniversary of the first rehearsal of his Dream, and a lot of people from the Bouffe du Nord were over, including, I'm shockingly forgetting his name, the actor. That's him, yes. He played Timon for Peter Brook, and he said quite casually in the course of an interview that the greatest Hamlet he'd ever seen, and the play had worked on him because he'd been surprised by the casting, had been yours.
That's very kind.
Which he'd seen while he was over. Yes. Yes. And I think, one of the things about that production was that it was extremely spiritual. It was it was quite churchy.
Yes, literally.
Yes.
Literally.
Yes. Did that resonate for you with your days as a choir boy?
Well, it was interesting. I remember at the time somebody writing rather furiously that how can they? Hamlet is the least Christian of all Shakespeare's plays. And I remember thinking, but that's just rubbish. You can't have somebody coming from purgatory to tell their son that he ought to go and avenge his death because otherwise everyone will go to hell. You can't even begin that conversation without some sense of a religious context. But I was aware that I was very keen, and the director was very keen that I couldn't see. And they had a big cross on the stage, and Claudius was dressed like some sort of Byzantine emperor. It was like a high priest, really. I think there were various things I knew I didn't want. I didn't want to do a neo-fascist environment because I think that had been done a lot, and well, I knew there were various things I knew I wasn't particularly interested in, including actually his madness. I couldn't see any indication that he ever really went mad, but that was partly cowardice because I thought I didn't know how to play that. And I also, the third thing I didn't want to do was to roll on a bed with my mother. No, she's my mother. I don't want sex with her. So there were various things that I knew that I didn't really want to use. But one of the things I did think was that his, I don't think it's a mistake he went to Wittenberg. I don't think it's a mistake that he presumably is still a student and he's presumably still studying something close to some theological area, philosophical area. This boy or this young man is steeped in that type of thinking, and I think he reacts to that type of thinking in his behaviour, including not killing Claudius in front of an altar when he's praying, because then he will go to heaven. I think they're quite specific, and having a father that comes from purgatory to tell him to go and take revenge for his death. So I think I was very very exercised by the religious context of the play. I also, as people kept on writing, at the time my mother just died 2 months before, and she knew I was going to do it, but she said I will live to see it, and she didn't live to see it. So I think, inevitably, and it sounds sad, it was very sad, but it sounds self-pitying, but I think obviously it must have had some sort of, you can't stand on stage and go, remember me, without that going through your head. And of course it was and I said many times at the time, it was my gift to her. She gave me this amazing life and encouragement, and that was if you're going to grieve, have the luck to play Hamlet, is all I can say, because he does a lot of it for you.
Yeah. Another play with a prayer in it, of course, The Tempest, a wonderful epilogue. But by the time you played Prospero, things had changed quite a bit. The previous Tempest you'd been in, very elegant, all the props conjured from a single basket, big open stage. You do Prospero for Gregory Doran, and there's a huge set, there's a vast quantity of electronic equipment. Ariel has sensors all over his body so that he can trigger projections across this vast area of the stage. There's all sorts of digital stuff happening to represent Prospero's magic. And the production is live streamed. There's one point at which you're actually acting not only to the people in the room, but also to a great many cameras, which has now become routine. I mean, I saw the Lehman trilogy in a community centre in Hampshire. It was a lot cheaper than the West End. Do you feel that having to work in a production where there's enormous technical stuff that you've got to work around makes a big difference?
No.
Oh, good.
I mean, actually, I was quite surprised because there was a lot of, as this Tempest that I was talking about, had an aerial who could, I don't know how you describe it, he was, what do you call them?
Avatar.
Like an avatar, yeah. And we had lots of technical stuff, and it was an incredibly, as has been said, incredibly sort of elaborate design. The weird thing is that actually, in the end, both me and Ariel, who were the two people most concerned with all the trickery, in the end, and it sounds conventional, but in the end it was about him and me.
Yeah.
In the end. And in the end it was about speaking to each other. And people would ask me, what's it like to play with an avatar? And I was thinking, I don't notice any difference. I really genuinely don't notice any difference. It's just another tool in the box. I don't know how that sort of technology is going to go, but at the moment it's just another tool in the box. In terms of filming play, I found this again. That's the thing that's a big change since I started. But the sophistication of recording theatre performances is now. And very early on in the process, when in England we started recording at a higher level theatre performances, I was on a little body of people at the National to decide whether to give money to this. And they showed us, they said, this is what we used to do. And they showed us an archive recording of a production, incredibly dark. And this is what we will do. And they showed us, multi-camera, sophistication. The dark production, which I didn't recognise, was Hamlet, as I did. And I couldn't even recognise my own production. So anyway, so I thought, well, you got my money, because it's got to be better than this. And the wonderful thing about the guys who do the recording for the National Theatre and indeed the Donmar and other theatres I've recorded at, is that they are absolutely rigidly strict about not disturbing us in any way. So they literally would come and say, hello, my name is Bob, I'm your director for this show, there'll be a camera there, camera there, camera there, camera there, and you'd never see them again. And I've never been asked to change anything. I've got a fellow out here, actually, today, and I wonder whether he's had the same experience, but we were never asked to change anything. And at the very first recording at that level, that sophisticated level I did, was a play called London Assurance with Fiona Shaw, which had me and Fiona playing grotesquely over the top. I mean, huge performances. And we were both terrified. We said, this is not going to work on camera, this is going to be a disaster. But we have no choice. I said, the play is of such lack of substance that if we don't do this, the whole thing will collapse into a heap, and we've just got to keep going. And in fact, actually, of course, it was fine, because the film crew were making sure that the audience knew that it was in the theatre, blah, 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 blah. So I, again, don't even acknowledge that they're there at all. So.
Thank you. Yesterday, someone said that Shakespeare is like a loop into which an actor has to jump at some point of his career. It seems indeed that for many, many actors, Shakespeare is a must in all senses of the term, but is a privilege, but also sort of duty. It is also what Patrick Shaw thought, for instance. And not only is Shakespeare a must, but paradoxically he's also terrifying to many actors. And Peter Brook used to say to his actors, forget about Shakespeare, because it's by forgetting Shakespeare that you're going to find him. What do you think of this recommendation? And have you developed a particular way of dealing with Shakespeare as a myth when you have to perform your Shakespearean roles?
It was very interesting yesterday, that thing of anxiety. I went away and thought about it a lot. There is an anxiety about Shakespeare, and we know that. British actors are brought up with an anxiety that they should do it in order to prove their credentials, which is nonsense, of course. I mean, it's nonsense. But, there is a sort of thing that if you can do it, then somehow you earn a big tick. It should be a joy and an exploration, and it should not be compulsory. I was very lucky because I didn't come from a family that read like that. I came from a very musical family and a very medical family, and so I was introduced to Shakespeare at school by the same teacher that eventually organised my performance as Hippolyta. And then in my big school, my later school, by an extraordinary teacher who got me to do King Lear when I was 17 and Desdemona at 14. And it's an obvious thing to say, but to introduce Shakespeare to a boy of that age by getting him to do it is a completely different thing. And it was never ever frightening in that sense. I was lucky that I was never told to be frightened of it. It was just another option. And I was more frightened of singing, which I'd done all my life, than I was of acting. Acting was just great. I think as I said yesterday, I think there is it's a bit sad when you see, especially now I'm such an ancient actor, but when you see younger actors who are scared of it and think there's some sort of trick. And Peter's right. It's not about a trick, it's about just regarding him as another writer, but one who can give you more joy and more pleasure than most, I would say. So it's not about putting him up there.
Another question that arises from something that's been talked about during the course of this conference: when you're preparing a role and when you're learning a role, do you annotate? Do you take notes? Do you produce archives? Do you scribble on things?
Well, I was joking yesterday that I don't do as much as Sam West does.
Nobody does.
Seeing his things up on the screen. But I think he's probably that type of mind, isn't he? That type of man, with a vast range of reference. I tell you what I do, and more conscientiously now than I used to, is I mark the metre up. Really pedantically, I go through every single line, and it's marked up. And that's actually, because I was joking yesterday about saying you can have some of my scripts from home, and actually they're so dull because a bit like that earlier actor who was mentioned, who just marked up his part. It's a bit like that, really. It's just literally just. And if ever I'm asked for advice to give to somebody who says, we've got any advice about playing Shakespeare, I just say, if I were you, I'd do that and learn it with the rhythm already marked up and in your head, so you just never have to think about it again, and you can then do anything you like with it. I mean, you can fly, but you will never lose that rhythm. So I do that. In terms of outside references, in Shakespeare plays, I tend to not read around it at all. I love reading around it because I'm a bit of an anorak. I love reading around the play after I've done it. But before doing it and while doing it, I don't tend to read around it, except for Lear. Lear was the only exception I made on that case, which is that I decided to do some research into Alzheimer's. So, because I thought Shakespeare saw somebody, he knew somebody who aged in that type of way, and it's too accurate not to be a portrait of Alzheimer's in some sort of way, or dementia in some sort of way. So that's the only time I've worked from the outside, but I don't tend to write down motivations. Which was almost hinted at yesterday. There's somebody talking about the lady whose lecture I saw about, probably here, I don't know, who did, there you are, about because I kept on thinking of something they call actioning, which is something that various directors used to do about, you action a thought, and I've never done that. I've never done, but just occasionally I sort of do a. I've got this. Well, two things. Actually, this relates back to the Tempest question. I've got two little private obsessions. One is that if you microscopically, like a mosaic, you go through every single thought, not emotion, thought, in a part, you'll often arrive at a picture that you don't expect and an emotional landscape that you didn't expect. And you'll often find things that, in other words, if you wipe the slate clean and just literally go too hot, right, too hot. He's saying too hot. He's not saying hot, not like Liz Leontis, as you know. He's looking at his wife flirting with his best friend. It's not hot, it's too hot. It's too hot. Think really carefully about the fact he's specifically saying it's too hot. And does that make sense? Rather than saying, my God, he must be jealous, or he must be angry, or he must be frustrated, or whatever. Forget about that. Just think that is too hot for what? Because of what? In other words, it's all a question of a series of thoughts, and then very often I think you find areas that you didn't expect. An example, Cassius in Julius Caesar threatens to commit suicide in every single scene he's in, until he finally does commit suicide. Now, if you take that threat to commit suicide at face value and just as a threat to commit suicide, then without any colour to it, then you can go anywhere. In other words, I decided that those threats were genuine. They weren't hysterical, they weren't theatrical, they weren't flouncy, they weren't for effect. He genuinely thought that if this goes on, I cannot live. I cannot live under Julius Caesar as king or emperor. I will have to kill myself. And it completely changes the whole nature of his development. And also makes his final suicide, I think, terribly painful, because that's what he's saying. He's saying the political situation is such that I can no longer live. It's not a that's a sort of bad example. But you know what I mean? It's not to do with preconceptions. The other thing, and this is to do with the Tempest, is that very often you can be seduced by the beauty. Our revels now are ended. These are actors, as I foretold you, are vanished into air, to thin air, melted into air, thin air. It must be one of the most beautiful speeches ever written. It's said by a man to his future son-in-law just before he's about to get married. We are such stuff as dreams are made on, and our little life is rounded with a sleep. Sorry? Sorry? You're saying what? You're saying, are you saying life is absolutely worthless? And are you saying it to your prospective son-in-law in front of your daughter? In other words, is this the worst father of the bride speech ever? Life is shit. Okay? And because we've all done this speech at so many memorial services, and my God, it works well as a memorial speech, there is a bit of me thought, hang on a minute, this man is angry.
Yeah.
And it's a bit like when you see Othello doing speeches of such incandescent beauty over the body of the wife that he's murdered. And I think, you think, my God, Shakespeare's doing something really wonderful here. He's tugging both ways, isn't he? He's saying, this is, yes, I can write as beautifully as you want, but I can think as hard as you like.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, obviously I'm disappointed that there isn't a huge archive that you're going to donate to the library. But of course,
annotated.
Of course, you need to get the meter right, because otherwise Abigail will get it.
Yes,
which is a terrible risk. This might be a good moment to open it up to the floor. Do you think, Florence? Would someone like a microphone for a moment?
Be brave.
Yes.
As inexperienced actors tend, I say that because I started acting not long ago, so I wouldn't say young actors, but
Good for you.
actors tend to try to please the audience now try to meet expectations. And was there a point in your career when you realized that you didn't have to please anyone, or was it never an issue?
Congratulations on your acting decision. As soon as you started speaking, something came into my head about, I was doing The Seagull. I was playing Constantine, and I've mentioned it before. It was a major moment of my life, in my career. And Terry Hands, the director, said to me, he said, I'm not talking literally here, but do you act for your mother or your father? And I said, I think I know what you mean. You mean, do I act to please and make mummy love me? Or do I act to impress, to make daddy be proud of me? It was actually one of the best notes I've ever been given. You see, I thought, and I said, actually, I suppose, if I'm honest with myself, I act for my mother. I want to be loved, and yeah. He said, for the next week, can you try and act for your father? And it was an absolutely brilliant note, because of all parts, Constantine, of course, is quite literally, I mean, as close to a mummy's boy as Chekhov ever wrote, and to play a mummy's boy who really wants to impress his dad is a good note. Yeah, because of course what it did with Constantine is to make him the young writer. You know, make him somebody who could see no reason why somebody of his talent and his imagination couldn't be a successful writer. And it just changed the nature of the whole thing. In general terms, it's a big trap, isn't it? I think that did, if you'd asked me for a moment in my life when that I had to compute that problem of seducing and appealing to people, then that was it. There's nothing wrong in appealing to people. You know, that's this part of our job as well, and I think you have to be watchable. But I think there are, you know, I've played enough monsters to know that is not the only route to an audience's interest. And also, you have a political role to play. I don't mean a P with a small, well, sometimes a big P, but often with a small P. But you have to make arguments which might not necessarily be ones that you want to be agreed with. It is quite interesting, isn't it? About who was I talking to recently about? You know that thing about, you know, if you're an actor, you have to fall in love with, you have to love your characters. It's sort of 3/4 true, isn't it? Because I think part of our job is to also judge our characters, I think. And if you play Beria in Death of Stalin, which is a film I did, and you play Beria, or if you play Iago, you're going to have to judge them. I don't think you can play Iago thinking he's just, I understand and excuse every move he makes. I think you have to say, no, that is unforgivable, what Iago does. That doesn't mean you can't play him even sympathetically, but you don't have to play him sympathetically either. You know, you can play him unsympathetically. What he does is abuse.
This is not about education, but that was such a wonderful anecdote just now, because it gets right at director. If you're an academic who cares about performance and you sit in on rehearsals, you see this alchemy that you can't analyze or write down in academic language at all. And that is that a director will say, you direct Your Mother or Your Father, and the actor's performance will change. And we see it. We're not blind or exceptionally stupid. We see it, and we don't know how to write about it because we don't know what's happening in that moment. So what are you hearing that he said, and how does that calibrate your performance? And we can see it, but we can't see it, you know? And that's, in part, the reason I kind of went into looking at actors' scripts was because I wanted to see the alchemy. I wanted to parse it out and see the pieces of it. And I've said this to directors who have academic experience themselves. I just want to solve that question. And they said, no one ever has, no one ever will, but good on you if you do.
Well,
I guess my question, if any, is that gulf between acting and academia and how we can maybe use what
it's a great comment because directors, get obviously a lot of praise, exercise a lot of power, but they also get a lot of stick and they get criticised for all sorts of things. One of the things, the reason why when people say, would I like to direct, I'm always very wary of that, I might try and do it one day, is that I don't understand that process either. And I don't understand what it is about certain comments that will change a performance. And I do know that, it's the old thing about again, it was Terry Hands actually, who said to me, I give you a note, but I don't want you to do it. If I'm to be absolutely honest, this is actually not in rehearsal, but this is much later when he wasn't directing me anymore, but he said, I give notes, it doesn't do much for me if the actor then does exactly what I say, but equally well, and you don't, the old thing about don't give a line reading, we know that it's a very bad way of deadening, it's a very good way of deadening a line if you give somebody a line reading. What I find mysterious is that thing about, and you can see people like Sam and Nick Heitman doing it quite deliberately. They'll take sort of 3 psychological steps back. So they'll go, I want that effect, I want him or her to do this, so if I go say that, and then he'll do that, and then I say that. So it's like 4 stages back in the psychological process. So if I say something, then the final result will be what I want. Does that make sense? It's the only way I can describe it, is that somehow, and you can see Sam or Nick when they're thinking very hard, and you can see them thinking, what is the best psychological route from the comment I make to the effect I want? And the really good ones can work it out, and I think that's the big skill, really. Terry Hands was always very good at. I once played. This is just an adding. This has nothing to do with anything. But I once played a very flamboyant and rather camp restoration fop. He was very beautiful. And the morning of the press night, I was having a bath, and on the radio I heard a great actress called Evelyn Leigh on the radio. She was dead, but she was the recording of her. Oh, those very, very old Evelyn Leigh. And she was being. Did you? Yeah. Well, she was being asked questions, and anyway, she said, "Miss Leigh, how do you cope with nerves?" And she said, "Before I go on stage, I go, I am Evelyn Leigh. I'm Evelyn Leigh." I thought, ooh, that's interesting. So anyway, Terry, after this press night, we were having a drink afterwards. He said, "How did you cope with the nerves?" And I said, "Oh, I heard this interview with Evelyn Leigh." And she said, "I'm Evelyn Leigh, I'm Evelyn Leigh, I'm Evelyn Leigh." And so before I went on stage, I said, "I am Simon Ross Beale, I am Simon Ross Beale, I am Simon Ross Beale." And Terry went, "Well, from your performance, it looks as if you were going, I'm Evelyn Leigh." That wasn't a good note, but I just wanted to tell that story because it's yeah. There was something serious I was going to say, but it'll come back. It'll come back.
Yeah.
Willem en Florence gave us a long, exhaustive list of all the Shakespearean roles you played, and I was just wondering if there were still some roles that you wished you had played or wish you could play.
Ones I wasn't good at, I'd like to do again. I'd like to do Macbeth. I love the play, and I think it was a whole series of reasons, but one of the principal reasons why I didn't entirely sit easy in the part was because I had too many ideas about it. And it was like I was trying to do an essay about Macbeth. And I would,
indeed you did.
I did. And I would like to try that again. I would like to do Lear again when I'm older. Not that I didn't enjoy the Lear I did with Sam, but I'd like to do that again when I'm older. And in terms of Shakespeare parts, I'd like to do Falstaff on stage, because the only thing about doing it on film is, of course, you have to cut it quite a lot. And Shylock. But Shylock is one I've avoided. Yeah, one I've avoided. And I'm not particularly fond of the play. I haven't been asked directly, but I've been asked, would you consider it? And yeah, I have been asked, but I mean not. But it's a funny one about Shakespeare, isn't it? You sit there and do play. I don't like Meurthe of Venice particularly, but I bet if I did it, I'd love it. You know, I bet if I did Taming of the Shrew, I'd probably love it, although I find that doubtful. But it's, you know, the trouble about these plays is they all have something about them, and even Romeo and Juliet. You know, the ones I don't particularly like, I bet if I did them, I'd love them. So, but and also there's you know, the big problem in Shylock, as we know, is the anti-Semitic debate. And Angela, I think I might be a bit old for Angela, but given the fact that I've done every single Shakespeare part at the wrong age, I think perhaps somebody would like to cast me as Angela.
Can I ask you about actor training? When you're working with young actors on Shakespeare, do you think they have the kind of preparation that they need?
Can I point out I didn't have any training? First of all, I just mentioned that because as I say, I started off as an opera singer at the Guildhall, but then I left early and didn't train as an actor. Something I regret. As it happens, I'm involved with the Guildhall now, as, you know, mentoring. You know, I'm given an actor a year to look after. And I think their training technically is better than it was when I was there. But as I say, I can't really talk about that because I didn't do the whole course. But I mean, from what I saw, what I see now, I think their training in terms of you know, the boring technical stuff, or the fascinating technical stuff, is pretty damn good. I think it's. I know plenty of young actors who are brilliant Shakespeareans, actually. I sense that you think the standard's dropping, so that's why I'm hesitating. You're just being open about it. Well, I think we're fine, he says rather bullishly. I think we're fine. I think it's not to do with, if there's anything that's wrong, it's the status of this type of repertoire in our culture that's the tricky bit. You know, so in other words, a brilliant actor is not going to hurry to Stratford for 2 years. You know, it's not going to be his agent's first choice. I would guess, even if you're playing a major part. And in my day, 30 years ago, it was borderline, but it was still an option that you could spend 2 years doing Shakespeare. People would think it was a good choice, but I mean, it was beginning to change then. I think people were beginning to go, what, 2 years? 2 years? Whereas when Judy Dench's generation and Ben Kingsley's generation and all that lot, it was 5 years would be regarded as normal. So I think it's more. I think if there's a weakness in the system at the moment, it's there. It's not in terms of the technique of the young kids coming out of drama school.
This will be our last question.
Last question from Tiffany. Thank you. You talked today very clear how very sensitive you are both to language lyric and to its meaning. And so I was trying to come up with a question that put what you were talking about today with what you were talking about yesterday and with your job as an editor of text. And what I wondered was, how do people, or what do you do with performing words that cannot be lost because you don't know what they mean?
Affection and intention stamps the centre.
Well, this is a very fraught question. I'm not very Puritan about. I mean, I mentioned yesterday that it seems to me that my job and the job of the people that I work with is to make our performance as clear as possible at first hearing, because there are very few people who are going to come and bother to see me twice. So it seems to me that I will sacrifice almost everything in order to make myself clear for that first hearing. But when I say I'm not Puritan, then that does mean things like vocabulary. And I don't know how whether in 200 years' time we'll be doing a modernised version of Shakespeare. We might very well be doing that, like with Chaucer. I don't know, you know better than I do, Michael knows better than I do, about how literature develops over centuries. But if you have a really good joke as the sighting saying, I'd rather be the louse of a leper than to be Menelaus, which is a really good joke in context. And leper, the word leper is lazar. I'm sorry. You've just got to change lazar. It has the same rhythm as leper. I know it's a prose, but you know what I mean? You just think, oh, for God's sake, it's such a good laugh, and the thought is the same. And there are a couple of ones I remember in Benedict, in Much Ado, when we thought, that this word in Timon, interestingly enough, he does a lot of that sort of reverse syntax. So the first half of the line, the second half of the line could be reversed and be much clearer without any abuse of the rhythm. And I did that a lot. I thought there's no point in arbitrarily reversing the syntax of this particular sentence because that's what he wrote. No, that's terrible, isn't it? I've just said it. Because that's what he wrote. Try and make it a bit clearer. So I'm sort of, I'm sort of not very Puritan about that. And I have slightly more difficulties in comic roles of changing jokes. Although it is interesting, I'm perfectly used to the Porter and Macbeth doing topical jokes.
Yeah.
Isn't that weird? I'm completely used to that. So, but other jokes, let's say in a Touchstone or whatever, I get a little bit itchy when they start putting in things that. But then, logically, why not? And frankly, Touchstone is not very funny, so any jokes are welcome. Yeah. It'll be interesting to see how it's. develops over the next 100 years, won't it? Whether we'll actually starts.
Well, it would be interesting for someone, possibly.
Yeah, not for us, no. But I wonder whether we will change the. I'm trying to think of an equivalent. I can't really think of an equivalent. You see, one of the reasons why restoration comedy is not done in the UK at all now, very rarely, is that the difficulty of the language. That's an obvious thing to say, but you know, those very long sentences, those very elaborate syntax, and certain vocabulary that people just don't have any connection to, and it's if everybody who loves restoration comedy, that's a problem at the moment. People are just not doing it.
Florence?
Before Sarah gives us information about the workshop and that's all done, please join Michael and me in thanking you very much.
We will have a 10-minute coffee break, 10 minutes, and then we shall proceed to the theatre of the Japanese language, which is located in the big building over there that you see when you go out of the Hawaii. You see a huge big building. So we're going to go in there in about 10 minutes.